She rushed to the bathroom, hoping that it was something she could manage on her own. But what she saw next made her scream in horror. Maggots, large wriggling maggots, were coming out of her private parts. The sight and the unbearable pain sent Ijeoma into a state of shock. She collapsed. Ijeoma was born and raised in the quiet town of Nsukka, where life moved at a slower pace and people were content with what little they had. Her parents, hardworking farmers, did everything they could to provide for her and her two younger siblings. Though they lived modestly, they were a very happy family. Ijeoma, however, had bigger dreams. Dreams that extended far beyond the small town she called home. As a child, Ijeoma would often spend hours flipping through magazines, captivated by the glamorous lives of the rich and famous. She promised herself that one day she would leave Nsukka and live in the fast-paced world of Lagos, where she believed her dreams would come true. At the age of 19, Ijeoma moved to Lagos to attend university. Her parents were reluctant to let her go, fearing the dangers of the big city. But Ijeoma was determined. She enrolled in a course in business administration with the hopes of one day starting her own company. But Lagos, with its dazzling lights and endless opportunities, quickly proved to be more than she bargained for. Life in Lagos was expensive, and despite her parents' best efforts, the money they sent barely covered her tuition and rent, let alone her other expenses. Ijeoma found herself struggling to keep up with her peers, who always seemed to have the latest gadgets, designer clothes, and money to spend on weekends out. During her second year at university, Ijeoma met Chika, a fellow student known for her extravagant lifestyle. Chika was everything Ijeoma wanted to be: confident, fashionable, and seemingly always surrounded by wealth. The two quickly became friends, and Ijeoma soon found herself drawn to Chika's world. Chika was part of a group of young women who lived lavishly off the generosity of wealthy men. They called it runs, and it was a lifestyle that came with its own set of rules and dangers. At first, Ijeoma was hesitant. She had been raised with strong values and knew that what Chika was doing was wrong. But as the pressures of the city life mounted, her resolve weakened. One night, after a particularly stressful week, Chika invited Ijeoma to a party at one of Lagos's most exclusive clubs. The event was a lavish affair, filled with influential people, free-flowing champagne, and an air of luxury that Ijeoma had never experienced before. Chika introduced her to several wealthy men, one of whom took a particular interest in her. The man was much older, but he was charming and generous, showering Ijeoma with compliments and expensive gifts. By the end of the night, he had offered to take care of her expenses, no strings attached. Ijeoma was tempted, but the thought of where this could lead made her uneasy. Yet, as the days passed and her financial struggles continued, she found herself thinking more and more about the offer. Eventually, the lure of easy money became too strong to resist. Ijeoma agreed to meet the man again, this time at a private hotel suite. He was kind, gentle, and treated her like a queen. The guilt that had initially plagued her began to fade as she rationalized her actions. After all, she wasn't hurting anyone. With the money he gave her, she was able to pay her bills, buy new clothes, and even send some money back home to her family. But as time went on, Ijeoma's involvement in the runs lifestyle deepened. She began seeing more men, each one wealthier and more powerful than the last. The money flowed in, and with it came the luxury she had always dreamed of. But something inside her began to shift. The emptiness she felt after each encounter grew, and no amount of money or gifts could fill it. One evening, at an upscale lounge, Ijeoma's life took a turn when she met Kenechukwu. Kene, as he was known, was everything Ijeoma had ever wanted in a man. He was young, handsome, and immensely wealthy. Unlike the older men she usually met, Kene was closer to her age and had an air of mystery around him that intrigued her. Kene was different from the others. He didn't try to impress her with flashy gifts or grand promises. Instead, he was charming and attentive, making Ijeoma feel like she was the only woman in the world. They spent hours talking, and by the end of the night, Ijeoma was completely smitten. Over the next few weeks, Kene and Ijeoma grew closer. He took her to the most exclusive restaurants, showered her with thoughtful gifts, treated her with a level of respect that she wasn't used to, and whispered sweet promises of a future together. For the first time in a long while, Ijeoma felt truly happy. She began to imagine a future with Kene, where she would leave behind the once lifestyle and start afresh. Kene never pressured Ijeoma for anything, which only made her fall for him more. She saw him as her savior, the man who would rescue her from the life she had fallen into. As their relationship deepened, there were subtle signs that something wasn't right. Kene would disappear for days without explanation, his phone unreachable. He was secretive about his life, and though he showered Ijeoma with gifts, attention and money, he never introduced her to his friends or family. But Ijeoma, blinded by love and greed, ignored the red flags. She convinced herself that Kene was just a busy man and that he would eventually settle down with her. One evening, after a romantic dinner, Kene proposed a weekend getaway. He told Ijeoma that he wanted to introduce her to his family and show her where he grew up. Ijeoma was ecstatic. She saw this as the next step in their relationship, a sign that Kene was serious about her. They drove out to the estate on a Friday evening. The journey was long, but Ijeoma didn't mind. She was too excited about the weekend ahead. The estate was everything she had ever imagined: vast, secluded, and luxurious. Kene had arranged for them to stay in a private villa away from the main house. The first night at the estate was magical. Kene had arranged for a private dinner under the stars with soft music playing in the background. They talked late into the night, and when they finally went into the bedroom, they made passionate love. Ijeoma felt like she was living in a dream. She was convinced that Kene was the one she had been waiting for, the man who would make all her dreams come true. When Ijeoma woke up the next morning, she was no longer in the luxurious villa. She was lying by the side of a dusty road, confused and disoriented. Her clothes were torn and her body ached all over. She had no memory of how she got there or what had happened after they made love. Panic set in and she realized that Kene was nowhere to be found. She managed to flag down a passing car, and the driver, seeing her distress, agreed to take her back to Lagos. The journey was a blur for Ijeoma, who was too shaken to think clearly. All she knew was that something terrible had happened and she needed to get home. A few hours after Ijeoma returned to her apartment, the pain began. At first, she dismissed it as a side effect of the night before, as it started as a dull ache in her lower abdomen. But it quickly escalated into a sharp searing pain that left her doubled over in agony. She rushed to the bathroom, hoping that it was something she could manage on her own. But what she saw next made her scream in terror. Maggots. Large wriggling maggots were coming out of her private parts. The sight and the unbearable pain sent Ijeoma into a state of shock. She collapsed on the floor, unable to process what was happening to her. Terrified and ashamed, Ijeoma isolated herself. She didn't know who to turn to or how to explain what was happening to her. The maggots continued to come, and the pain grew worse with each passing day. She tried to reach Kene, but his number was still switched off, and she couldn't remember the way to his house. Desperation turned into denial as Ijeoma convinced herself that this was some sort of punishment for her lifestyle, that it would pass if she just prayed hard enough. As days turned into weeks, Ijeoma's condition worsened. She finally confided in her friend Chika, who was horrified by what she saw. Chika convinced Ijeoma to seek medical help, but the doctors were baffled by her condition. They ran tests, but nothing could explain the presence of the maggots. Out of options, Chika suggested they visit a traditional healer, someone who might understand what modern medicine could not. The traditional healer was an elderly woman known for her wisdom and connection to the spirit world. She listened to Ijeoma's story and examined her closely. After a long silence, she delivered her verdict. Ijeoma had been used in a ritual. The maggots were a manifestation of the dark forces Kene had unleashed upon her. The healer explained that as long as the maggots continued to emerge from Ijeoma's body, Kene would continue to grow wealthier. The curse was unbreakable and Ijeoma's fate was sealed. The healer's words crushed Ijeoma's spirit. She had hoped for a cure, a way to undo the horror that had taken over her life, but there was no escape. The maggots were relentless, and so was the pain. She felt her body deteriorating, and with it, her will to live. The luxury and wealth she had once craved now seemed meaningless, overshadowed by the reality of her situation. Ijeoma withdrew from everyone. She stopped answering calls, stopped going out, and became a prisoner in her own home. The maggots consumed her both physically and mentally. She could feel them inside her, eating away at her from the inside. The pain was constant, and there was no relief. She was dying and she knew it, but she couldn't bring herself to face the reality of her situation. Meanwhile, Kene's wealth continued to grow. He was now one of the richest men in his town, but the wealth brought him no peace. His nights were plagued by nightmares of Ijeoma, her screams echoing in his mind. He tried to drown his guilt in alcohol and women, but nothing could erase the image of Ijeoma's suffering from his thoughts. He knew that his wealth was tainted, but there was no turning back. He had made a deal with dark forces, and now he was trapped. Despite everything, Chika refused to give up on Ijeoma. She continued to visit her, bringing food and trying to lift her spirits. One day, she convinced Ijeoma to attend a prayer service at a nearby church. The pastor prayed fervently for Ijeoma, asking God to break the curse that had been placed upon her. For a brief moment, Ijeoma felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way out. But the hope was short-lived. The maggots returned with a vengeance, more aggressive than before. Ijeoma's body was now visibly decaying, her skin pale and her eyes sunken. She could feel herself slipping away, and the little hope she had clung to was extinguished. The healer's words echoed in her mind. As long as the maggots came, Kene would continue to grow richer. Ijeoma's condition worsened rapidly. She was now bedridden, too weak to move. The maggot had taken over her body, and she knew that her time was running out. She could no longer eat or sleep. All she could do was lie there and wait for her end. The pain was unbearable, but it was the guilt and shame that weighed on her the most. She had brought this upon herself, and now she was paying the ultimate price. As Ijeoma lay dying, Kene's luck began to change. The police, acting on a tip, launched an investigation into his sudden wealth. They uncovered evidence of his involvement in ritualistic practices, and it wasn't long before they tracked him down. Kene was arrested in his mansion, surrounded by the wealth he had gained through rituals. As he was led away in handcuffs, he finally realized the full extent of what he had done. The money, the luxury, the power, it had all come at too high a price. Ijeoma took her last breath on a rainy afternoon. Chika was by her side, holding her hand as the life drained out of her. There was no peace in Ijeoma's death, only the cold, harsh reality of a life cut short by greed and deceit. She died with tears in her eyes, her body ravaged by the curse that had consumed her. The news of Ijeoma's death spread quickly. Her funeral was a sober affair, attended by only a few close friends and family members. There were no grand eulogies. They gathered around Ijeoma's grave. There was no air of sorrow or regret. Those who knew her remembered the vibrant young woman she had once been, full of dreams and ambitions. But as they looked at her coffin, they couldn't help but think about the dangers of chasing empty promises. Ijeoma's story became a reminder of how the pursuit of wealth without integrity could lead to ruin. While Ijeoma was laid to rest, Kene was facing the consequences of his actions. The police investigation revealed his dark past, and the evidence against him was overwhelming. The testimonies of those who had been affected by his rituals painted a grim picture of a man consumed by greed. As Kene stood trial, the weight of his crimes brought down on him. The wealth he had acquired meant nothing now, and the luxurious life he had built crumbled around him. The police found evidence of his ritualistic practices in his mansion, and his trial was swift and decisive. Kene was sentenced to life imprisonment, his wealth confiscated and redistributed to those he had wronged. Justice, though delayed, had finally been served. Kene's life in prison was a far cry from the luxury he had once enjoyed. Stripped of his wealth and status, he was just another inmate, facing a life sentence for his crimes. The other prisoners, upon learning about his past, shunned him, viewing him as someone who had traded a human life for money. Kene spent his days in isolation, haunted by the memory of Ijeoma. The guilt and shame ate away at him, leaving him a hollow shell of the man he once was. Chika, Ijeoma's closest friend, struggled with the loss. She blamed herself for not doing more. She blamed herself for not doing more to save Ijeoma, for not recognizing the danger Kene posed. The grief weighed heavily upon her, and she found it difficult to move on. The sight of Ijeoma's decaying body haunted her dreams, and she was consumed with guilt. Chika made it her mission to warn other women about the danger of materialism and the risks of associating with men like Kene. In this tragic tale, we see the consequences of greed, the lure of materialism, and the dangers of tampering with dark forces. Ijeoma's life was cut short by her desire for wealth, and Kene's life was ruined by his willingness to use rituals to achieve his goals. This story serves as a powerful reminder that the choices we make can have far-reaching and